He was the first person in human history to set a record for diving 100 meters underwater without carrying oxygen, relying solely on holding his breath. A true legend. At the same time, he was also the first in history to become a notorious scoundrel, abandoning his wife and child after falling in love with a dolphin during an affair. He is Jacques Cousteau, a man who devoted his entire life to studying the idea that humans were meant to be aquatic creatures. In the end, however, he became a bizarre figure who, unable to reconcile the gap between his ideals and reality, turned to depression and ultimately took his own life. Today, let's take a look together at the life of this diving legend, a life far more dramatic than any TV series. November 23, 1976, a day destined to be extraordinary. On the coast near Monte Cristo in Italy, a group of people were busily preparing for the legendary diver Jacques Cousteau to attempt a feat never before achieved by humankind, a 100-meter breath-hold dive beneath the sea. So-called breath-hold diving means that the diver is not allowed to carry any breathing apparatus. After gripping the weighted bar with both hands head down, the diver is almost dragged vertically to the deepest point and then brought back up by a balloon or other lifting device. Prior to this, the record was set by Jacques himself a year earlier at 96 meters. Unlike the staff, who were brimming with excitement and eager to witness a new record, Jacques himself sat quietly by the edge of the dive boat. He looked uneasy, and his spirits were not high. The weather that day was very cold, the seawater was icy, and the waves were rough. On top of that, Jacques had injured 2 of his fingers from an electric shock the day before. It was as if difficulties were piling up one after another. By all accounts, this challenge was not going to go smoothly, and in Jacques' mind, he was already considering backing out, but his team would not allow him to do so. With the support of his sponsors, the divers had already set up a lift at the finish line 100 meters underwater, just waiting for Jacques to pull out the small orange flag that would mark the success of the challenge. What's more, members of the Italian Underwater Research Committee were also present. Underwater journalist Gaetano Cafiero was also standing by at a depth of 70 meters with his camera, ready to capture that thrilling moment. At the command of the team leader Alfredo, Jacques could only reach out and grab the handle of the lift. This machine, weighted with over 30 kilograms, would pull Jacques down to 30 meters above the seabed at a speed of 1 meter per second, and everything went smoothly. But at the critical point of 40 meters, Jacques had to slow down, because at this depth, the pressure on his body was already 4 times that at the surface. Under such extreme pressure, if the eustachian tubes do not function properly and cannot balance the pressure between the sinuses and the outside environment in time, it will cause a relative negative or positive pressure to form inside the sinuses. This pressure difference can lead to congestion, swelling, exudation, or even bleeding of the sinus mucosa, resulting in symptoms such as nasal pain, a feeling of fullness in the nose, nosebleeds, headaches, and blurred vision. If the barotrauma is severe, it may lead to complications such as blood or fluid accumulation in the sinuses, as well as bleeding within the orbit or inside the skull, which can be extremely dangerous for divers. When they reached 50 meters, Jacques even paused in place for 2 to 3 seconds. At that moment, the reporter Cafiero was simply too excited and his head got too close to the descent rope, which is a big taboo in freediving as it can disrupt the diver's descent rhythm. Jacques was so distracted and frustrated that he almost gave up. Fortunately, the safety diver Jürgen reacted quickly and pulled Cafiero away, allowing the challenge to continue. Finally, after 1 minute and 45 seconds, Jacques finally reached the extreme depth of 100 meters, but he didn't have time to celebrate because another accident happened while he was inflating the buoy for his ascent. He just couldn't find the valve switch. Without the buoy, he wouldn't be able to ascend quickly. And the safe breath hold limit for freediving is 3.5 minutes. If he exceeded that time, his life would be in danger at any moment. Fortunately, after a frantic scramble, he finally found the inflation valve. Once the buoy was inflated, Jacques clung tightly to that small buoy. In his own words, it was like an umbilical cord connecting a baby to its mother. When he finally surfaced and breathed in air for the first time, this man who was born for the water felt an unprecedented clarity. After 3 minutes and 39 seconds, he had returned to land. On April 1, 1927, April Fool's Day, Jacques Cousteau was born in Shanghai. Both of his parents were French. His father was an architect for the French municipal government who at the time was tasked with planning the French concession. The surging waters of the Huangpu River flowed endlessly, bearing witness to the hustle and bustle and the prosperity of this city. It also quietly nurtured Jacques' earliest curiosity and longing for the unknown world. Jacques still clearly remembers that during the summers of his childhood, the whole family would move to Japan to escape the heat. It was a small port town called Tanjing, named for its frequent trade with the Tang dynasty in ancient times. By that time, however, Tianjin had already fallen into decline and lost its former glory. Yet thanks to its excellent natural conditions, clear, transparent waters, a rich diversity of aquatic species, and varied underwater terrain, it had become a diver's paradise. Jacques' father was very fond of diving and would always take Jacques and his older brother to play by the sea in Tianjin. Jacques learned to dive at the age of 6, which to most people would seem quite impressive and a sign of great talent for diving, but among the group of children he played with at the time, Jacques was not particularly remarkable. Almost everyone around him could dive. That was because he was surrounded by the children of Japanese ama, or women of the sea. Ama refers to women who dive alone into the sea without any breathing apparatus to harvest seafood such as lobsters, scallops, abalone, and sea snails. In ancient times, when fishing technology was underdeveloped and fishermen were forced by necessity, they had no choice but to take such risks. The earliest Japanese ama can be traced back to Shirahama 3,000 years ago. After carrying stones weighing 5 to 10 kilograms, they could easily dive down to a depth of 20 meters, where they would stay for 1 to 2 minutes or even longer. These ama women were born and raised by the sea. They were agile, moving skillfully and naked among the coral reefs, their movements smooth and natural, full of wildness, as if they were one with the ocean. This became Jacques' earliest and most profound impression of the relationship between humans and the sea. Originally, Jacques could have stayed in Japan for a carefree period, but with the outbreak of World War II, his family had no choice but to return to France in a time of crisis. His father settled them in the port city of Marseille, which, for young Jacques, became a second utopia and deepened his obsession with the ocean. More than once, he told his family that he fantasized about living on a bare tropical island, spending every day immersed in the sea from dawn till dusk. His mother teased him, saying his mind was filled with nothing but the ocean, but his father was very supportive, encouraging his thirst for adventure and his love for nature. So after World War II ended, in 1948, his father sent him on a trip around the world. Jacques traveled to Morocco, Sweden, Denmark, and Canada. In Sweden, he met a woman named Vitek Boyvad Scholt, and the two quickly fell in love and soon got married. After getting married, they welcomed the fruits of their love, a son named Jean-Jacques and a daughter named Dodi. Now that he had a family, Jacques could no longer wander the world as he had before, so he settled down with his wife and children in Florida, USA. In Miami, he found a job as an attendant at the local aquarium. Of course, it was also here that as a newlywed he had an affair with a dolphin. This dolphin was named Dolly, and she was the star among the female dolphins at the aquarium. In Jacques' own words, Dolly was a natural leading lady with a pair of bright, expressive eyes. Her personality was both fierce and lively. She possessed the grace of a ballerina, the flexibility of a cat, and was exceptionally intelligent. Just like a superstar, Jacques felt that Dolly liked to flirt with him because whenever he stroked Dolly's body with his gloved hand, she would be extremely happy, wearing an expression of pure enjoyment. At the same time, Dolly also looked forward to their dates. Almost every day at the same time around noon, Jacques would get into the water to play with Dolly. If Jacques was late and didn't keep to the schedule, Dolly would shake her head wildly and make very strange noises as if scolding him. Dolly's behavior made Jacques feel that dolphins seemed to have a concept of time as well. And during their interactions, the death of a sunfish in the aquarium also made Jacques realize that dolphins experience emotions as sad as those of humans. It was from this point on that Jacques began to ignore the species boundary between humans and dolphins, becoming completely immersed in this incredible love affair between man and dolphin. In order to be with Dolly, he even went so far as to break the aquarium's rules, stealing the duty roster and altering it so that he could go into the water more frequently. Because he needed to stay in the water for long periods to meet with her, Jacques discovered that he could easily hold his breath underwater for 2.5 minutes and that this duration could keep increasing. He was able to swim 150 meters between breaths and then lie underwater for another 3.5 minutes. To improve his diving skills, Jacques would grab hold of the green sea turtle in the pool each time. As long as he placed one hand on the turtle's neck and the other on its tail, he could steer the turtle to swim in any direction, just like driving a car. It's worth mentioning that during this period, Jacques also received the tragic news that his father had died while diving, but even this did not diminish his love for the clownfish. Nor did it lessen his obsession with diving. On the contrary, over time, Jacques felt less and less like a land creature and more like he belonged in the sea. It was also through his relationship with the clownfish that Jacques developed a deep sympathy for the fish kept in captivity in aquariums, keeping them locked up like prisoners for the rest of their lives just for human enjoyment. It's humans who need dolphins, not dolphins who need humans. Endless performances or being treated like lab rats, humans see them as creatures to be exploited. Is that really love? But soon Jacques no longer had time to feel sorry for the dolphins. He was more inclined to pity himself because the aquarium had brought in a male dolphin. That's right, his rival in love had appeared. As soon as this male dolphin named Pedro arrived, he attracted the attention of all the female dolphins. But Jacques stubbornly believed that Clown still loved him more, because every time Pedro tried to interrupt his dates with Clown, she would angrily drive him away. But soon Jacques realized that it was all just wishful thinking on his part because Clown was pregnant. Clearly, he was not the father of the child. Jacques could only watch helplessly as Clown gave birth to his rival Pedro's baby. Yet he didn't blame Clown. He even fantasized about it. He wanted to raise the little dolphin together with Clown, imagining the three of them as a family playing together at sea. Unfortunately, the good times didn't last. After his rival Pedro fell ill, the aquarium began a thorough investigation into staff misconduct. Jacques' frequent secret meetings with Clown in the water could no longer be kept under wraps, and he was fired by the aquarium. Being forced to break up with Clown was a huge blow to Jacques. Heartbroken, he no longer had the strength to maintain his marriage and family. So a few weeks later, he divorced his wife and gave up custody of his child. After that, he completely cut off contact with his family, and no one knew where he went. Even though his two children were only 7 or 8 years old, an age when they needed their father's love the most, Jacques disappeared for a full 20 years. Almost all his relatives and friends thought he was already dead. It wasn't until 1976 that his daughter, Dodie, suddenly saw a familiar figure in the newspaper. Even after all these years, she immediately recognized the meticulous man in the picture, completely wrapped in a diving suit. It was her father, Jacques Mayol. This man was actually still alive, and he seemed to be doing quite well. At this time, Jacques was at the peak of his life, holding a new title, the first man in human history to dive to a depth of 100 meters without using any breathing apparatus. In fact, as soon as Jacques ran away from home, he plunged straight into the Calanques Islands, a paradise for free diving and the best training ground for him to keep pushing his limits in the ocean. Through his interactions with the clownfish, he discovered that dolphins, as mammals, usually also need to surface for air every 2 to 3 minutes. This frequency is something that a human like him can also achieve, except that dolphins can hold their breath much longer than humans and dive much deeper. So, here comes the question. They're both mammals, both rely on lung breathing, so why can dolphins live in the sea while he, as a human, cannot? At this point, Jacques also realized that he could no longer live without water. Rather than just being an ordinary land creature, he wanted to challenge himself. Coincidentally, it was during those years that freediving had just emerged as a new sport, and scientists also took advantage of this sport. They kept researching the limits of human diving. In fact, ever since 1913, when a Greek sailor tied a guide rope to the lost anchor of the Italian battleship Regina Margherita at a depth of 61 meters, scientists have been fascinated by diving. The reason is simple. Freediving, compared to regular scuba diving, has more advantages. Ordinary divers, carrying compressed air tanks on their backs, can only grope their way forward in shallow seas along underwater mountains and reefs. Because scuba gear is too bulky, movements are not agile, and it makes a lot of noise. In contrast, freedivers are much more flexible in their movements. They can lie on the surface of the deep sea, and when they notice any movement in the water, they can dive down to investigate. At that time, during the intense fighting of World War I and World War II, if such divers could be trained, they could secretly sabotage enemy warships without being detected. After the war, in 1949, the first freediving competition was held, and only men participated at that time. The record for this competition was set by Italian pilot Raimondo Bucher, who reached a depth of 30 meters underwater. Then, in 1953, another Italian, Alberto Novelli, set a new world record by reaching 43 meters. In 1965, Enzo Maiorca set yet another world record by reaching 54 meters, and he was also Jacques' greatest rival. After that, the two of them took turns breaking each other's records multiple times. It wasn't until 1976, when Jacques set the ultimate record of 100 meters, that their rivalry was finally settled. It is worth mentioning that freediving is an extremely dangerous sport. During descent, divers must remain motionless, and as the water pressure increases, it can cause eardrum rupture, chest collapse, and in severe cases, even be life-threatening. Even if a diver manages to resurface successfully, staying too long at great depths can cause the blood's oxygen level to drop significantly during ascent, which can also lead to the diver losing consciousness. In other words, freediving is just like climbing Mount Everest without an oxygen tank. It's a classic extreme sport, truly risking one's life. Many divers end up injured and the mortality rate remains high. But it's precisely this kind of thrill that attracts countless people to challenge both their personal and human limits. However, because almost every competition resulted in fatalities not long after Jacques set the 100-meter record, the sport was suspended. From then on, divers were only allowed to dive under protective measures for scientific experiments. After the ban was issued, many freedivers chose to give up, including Jacques' rival and friend Enzo. But Jacques was unwilling to do so. The reason was simple. Others might dive for glory, but he dived to search for his true self and to find evidence that humans could also live underwater. Because of this, he was more than happy to work with scientists. In 1978, he joined 70 doctors, physiologists, divers, photographers, and journalists from different countries to travel to Lake Huaclacocha, located at an altitude of 4,650 meters in the Andes Mountains of Peru. They were there to conduct 132 different types of experiments, observing the biological responses of divers. These included breath holding under conditions of compressed air, pure oxygen, and severe hypoxia, providing new information for underwater physiology from the perspective of cardiovascular hemodynamics. Initially, in this high-altitude, low-oxygen environment, Jacques couldn't even last 20 seconds underwater, but he adapted quickly. After just 2 weeks, his breath hold time doubled, and he eventually managed to hold his breath underwater for 1 minute and 57 seconds. The scientists were amazed to discover that Jacques' red blood cells had proliferated and the volume of his coronary artery network had also increased. This indicated that the human physiological structure can evolve in response to changes in the environment. During this research, Jacques also discovered that humans possess the same abilities as marine mammals. The bradycardia reflex means that before entering the water, the heart beats more than 90 times per minute. But within 8 seconds after submersion, it drops to 50 beats per minute. And when diving to a depth of 70 meters, it can even go as low as 34 beats per minute. However, Jacques eventually parted ways with these scientists because after one diving experiment, the doctor actually told him that the intravenous catheter inserted before the experiment was over 10 centimeters long and was only a few centimeters away from his heart. For an ordinary person, this would be extremely dangerous, and any strenuous activity would be strictly prohibited. Yet the medical team allowed Jacques to continue deep diving underwater. Such an extreme sport clearly showed they didn't value his life at all. It was also the first time Jacques realized that, in the eyes of these scientists, he was nothing more than a guinea pig in human skin. After that, Jacques developed phlebitis, which often caused him unbearable pain, and this also affected his diving career. So, Jacques decided to stop working with the scientists and instead began to study the similarities between humans and aquatic mammals on his own. Jacques firmly believed in Sir Alister Hardy's aquatic ape hypothesis, which suggests that humans actually evolved from an aquatic ape. For example, our thumbs and index fingers cannot be spread more than 90 degrees apart, and if you try to stretch them, you'll notice a piece of extra skin in between, very much like the webbing found in aquatic animals. Additionally, humans are the only primate species with a significant layer of subcutaneous fat. This is similar to aquatic mammals like seals and dolphins. Jacques believed that this adaptation helps maintain body temperature in water, since fat insulates better than fur. In addition, humans have sparse body hair, whereas other primates are covered in fur. This hairlessness is likely an adaptation to reduce resistance in water, similar to the streamlined evolution seen in whales and dolphins. At the same time, the structure of the human nasal cavity is naturally well suited for holding one's breath underwater. Newborn babies even possess a diving reflex, which seems to be a remnant of adaptation to aquatic environments. Moreover, the direction of human skin pores also aligns with the direction of water flow. This also helps to reduce resistance while swimming. It's worth mentioning that he used this theory as an excuse for his own love of dolphins, claiming that he wasn't the first human to fall in love with a dolphin. He suspected that the legend of mermaids originated because sailors at sea were so repressed that they projected their desires onto female manatees or dugongs. Of course, aside from the bizarre aquatic evolution theory, Jacques himself was an extremely outrageous person. After her divorce, she dated more than 20 people over the years. Every girlfriend was beautiful and had a graceful figure, but every year, without fail, she would return to Miami to see Clown. And whenever they met, it was as if they were lovers reunited after a long separation, inseparable and affectionate. After Clown died, she cried bitterly and was especially depressed. Besides Clown, perhaps the only other person she truly loved was a woman named Gerda Queel. On the day she met her daughter for the first time in 20 years, this old father was holding his new lover in his arms. It was Gerda. Unfortunately, Gerda died in a tragic accident, leaving her utterly devastated. She then turned to her daughter, pouring out her grief over losing her beloved, completely forgetting that she herself had once abandoned her wife and child like a scoundrel. In addition to being harsh with his family and lovers, Jacques was also extremely stingy with his friends. He would often go to his friends' homes to freeload, staying for a whole month without contributing a single cent to household expenses. He was also especially fond of complaining. The famous director Luc Besson was a fan of his and invited him to shoot a film based on his life. The film The Big Blue, which centers on his story, was made, but Jacques kept complaining incessantly about the direction and the plot. You could say that this diving legend was as friendly to marine life as he was harsh to his fellow human. He lacked a sense of gratitude, believing that everything was simply his due. Of course, there's also the possibility that he never really considered himself human. In December 2001, Jacques was found to have committed suicide at his home in Italy. In 2017, a documentary about his life was released. In the documentary, people attributed Jacques' death to depression caused by old age and his inability to contribute to science any longer. But is that really the case? In my view, Jacques' ending was actually more like the result of a shattered dream. He believed that what coursed through his veins was a mixture of seawater and blood, but once he came ashore and in his old age faced his own aged, wrinkled and weary body in the mirror, he was filled with dissatisfaction. It was only then that he realized the layer of fat beneath his skin had never truly transformed him into an aquatic creature. It was merely a vestige left by evolution for humanity. Perhaps from the moment he grasped the dolphin banner, he had already anchored himself on the blurred boundary between human and dolphin. Yet, in the end, he made his most tragic farewell to the ocean in the most extreme way, on land. This man, who once measured the depth of the sea with his lungs, ultimately could not become a dolphin.